In this week's news, Desmond Tutu calls out Tony Abbott on climate change. Christian agencies helping out after Myanmar floods. And community service goes large scale in Venezuela.
This is In Focus Christian News and Current Affairs.
Hello, welcome to Record in Focus. It's great you could join us this week. I'm Kent Kingston.
And I'm Sibel Kute. Now, Kent, it looks like we're hitting a few hot topics this week.
Yeah.
James Standish will be discussing the religious freedom aspects of headscarves. And Trafford Fisher will tackle the question of smacking children. Should we or shouldn't we?
Boy, yes, I think that will get a few conversations going. And Sibel, if you thought that, after all that, maybe our My Story interview was going to be light and fluffy, well, think again. Dr. Cale Duval will be in a bit later to help us understand that most mysterious of biblical books, Revelation.
Well, we'd best be getting on with the news then.
Absolutely.
Former Archbishop of Cape Town Desmond Tutu is calling on Australian Prime Minister Tony Abbott, as well as the United Nations, to take immediate action on climate change. In an online petition, Emeritus Archbishop Tutu recommends a complete end to fossil fuel use by 2050. He says that if climate change is unchecked, the world can expect more extreme weather events and other natural disasters that, more often than not, affect the poorest and most vulnerable communities. Australia's Climate Change Authority and the Catholic Church's Caritas Development Agency are among the groups who expressed disappointment at the federal government's modest commitments to reducing Australia's carbon emissions. As same-sex marriage hits the headlines again, Christian and Muslim leaders have publicly indicated their opposition to changing the law in Australia. At a press conference in Sydney, the religious leaders headed by the Maronite Catholic bishop said that the weakening of marriage in Australian society has already had disastrous consequences in terms of broken families. They expressed concern for the welfare of children if families are deliberately established with the intent of separating children from their biological mother or father. They also expressed doubts that their faiths and ministers would be adequately protected from discrimination claims if marriage laws were extended to same-sex couples. In a separate event, a group of Aboriginal elders delivered a petition to federal parliament, also calling for current marriage laws to remain. Concern over alcohol-related harms in Western Australia has prompted a change in the law and calls for further restrictions on problem drinkers. According to the West Australian newspaper, the state government has passed new laws that ensure powdered alcohol products will be subject to government regulations. It's expected that a US-based company will begin selling powdered alcohol in Australia sometime this year. A number of West Australian communities are already struggling with alcohol-fuelled violence and crime. The state's top judge has called for Parliament to consider introducing laws that would prevent problem drinkers from being able to purchase alcohol.
The damage that alcohol causes in families, alcohol-related violence, alcohol health issues is absolutely astronomical. And anything that can be done to reduce the impact of alcohol is a really good move.
The Uniting Church in Australia is calling for prayer for the war-ravaged nation of South Sudan. In less than 2 years, thousands of lives have been lost in the civil war, 1.6 million people have been internally displaced, and millions are facing food shortages. Church leaders in South Sudan have made strong representations to the warring parties, saying that the current peace talks should bring about an immediate end to what they call a senseless war. Uniting Church leaders in Australia say they're also praying for their members who are worried about their families in South Sudan. About 1.1 million people have had their homes or livelihoods threatened or destroyed after cyclonic storms and floods swept through 12 of Myanmar's 14 states. The Adventist Development and Relief Agency, or ADRA, is among the organisations offering emergency relief to the survivors, delivering food, packages, cooking utensils, blankets and temporary shelter.
Thousands of acres of farmland have been destroyed with mud and debris. Replanting for a November harvest is almost impossible at this stage, which could result in food insecurity for all of these communities which have been affected by the flood. That's why ADRA is moving into a livelihood response. We will look at handing out seeds and also giving out equipment to ensure these farmers can get back into restoring their livelihoods.
The families of 22 Assyrian Christian hostages released by ISIS are relieved that they are now safe, but are concerned for the welfare of the remaining 205 captives. ISIS captured the hostages in February this year when they occupied parts of Syria's Hasaka province, prompting 3,000 Assyrians to flee the area. The Assyrian Church of the East has been negotiating for the hostages' freedom. This time, 14 of the 22 released were women. According to the Assyrian International News Agency, negotiations are ongoing for the release of the remaining hostages. Following the Bible and their Baptist forebears, Seventh-day Adventists practiced adult baptism by immersion. But new research suggests that the Church could do better at preparing and supporting new believers. The Avondale College survey of almost 1,500 baptised adults revealed that a quarter of them received no intentional mentoring once they'd been baptised. The research also highlighted the dilemma of how to respond to a child's request for baptism. How young is too young? On the positive side, 80% of respondents, when asked if they saw themselves as part of the church in 10 years' time, said definitely. In a large-scale community outreach push, 200,000 people have been shown the love of Jesus in 29 cities across Venezuela. The 9-day blitz saw 12,000 local Adventists donating blood, planting trees, visiting the sick, and providing a wide variety of services to the public. The event was dubbed Close to You, Venezuela, Smile, God Loves You, and attracted considerable media attention. Church leaders say they're grateful for the thousands of volunteers who made the outreach possible and are hoping to make it even bigger next year. The winners of 2015's Australian Christian Books of the Year have been announced at an awards event organised by Sparklet in Melbourne. Taking out top honours was Michael Gladwin's History of Australian Army Chaplains. Judges described it as a book of national importance and an insight into the Australian character. Michael Gladwin's history headed up a strong field of contenders covering apologetics, biblical studies and practical Christianity. The Young Australian Christian Writer Award went to Tim Sharp with his fantasy genre allegory, Undying. A church in Alabama has launched what just might be the world's first gun range ministry. The pastor of Rocky Mount United Methodist Church says that what started out as a community service teaching gun safety has become a unique setting for people to start exploring faith in Jesus. Everyone from pastors from other churches to families and elderly women have appreciated the gun range, which has recruited local police to help with training. And that's this week's news. Kent?
Thanks, Isabel. And I guess that's another story for our Only in America file. Wow. Stay with us. I'll be back in just a sec with James Standish and the great headscarf debate.
Planning your future can be a daunting task. What you want to do, who you want to be, and the road ahead can often be unpredictable. No one really knows what the future holds. Avondale. It's education designed for life.
Every week, It Is Written is available to millions of free-to-air viewers throughout Australia, New Zealand, New Guinea and the Pacific. It Is Written's Gary Kent regularly takes viewers to the far corners of the globe to report on new evidence and discoveries that confirm the Bible and Christian beliefs. It Is Written also provides medical care to remote Pacific Island communities. Join Gary Kent each week for It Is Written. See television guides in the It Is Written website for broadcast times. It Is Written with Gary Kent. It really is television that changes lives.
Hi, welcome back. Well, if there's one topic in the area of religious rights that's bound to get pulses racing and blood boiling, it's the issue of the Muslim headscarf. And here to help us fight another skirmish of this ongoing war is James Standish. Hi, James.
It's great to be back, Ken.
Why this issue now?
Well, there's been a recent US Supreme Court decision regarding an applicant to a very popular sort of, I guess you'd say, somewhat hip clothing company called Abercrombie & Fitch.
Okay.
And she was a Muslim woman. She went in wearing a headscarf, and she was denied the job because the company has a policy that their staff do not wear head coverings.
They had a hipness code, you know.
They
a
do
sort
have
of
a
dress
hipness
You've got to
code.
look sort of hip.
Yeah, I don't know if you could make it, to be honest. I think I'd have a shot if I gave it a...
But they didn't think the headscarf made it. Okay,
Yeah.
so in the end, the Supreme Court has ruled in favour of this young lady and said your prospective employer, would-be employer, was wrong, and they should have given religious some sort of well, what's the word?
Well, accommodation.
Accommodation, that's the word I'm searching for.
The question was whether an employer can have a so-called neutral policy that disparately impacts on different people's religions. So a Sikh or a Muslim or a Jew or you know, whatever it is. And the answer is that that they cannot exclude you from the applicant pool effectively because of that. It doesn't mean that you're always going to win, because there is another balancing test once you're across that, and that is that asks the practical questions, things like, you know, will your garb impact on safety in a workplace? So you can't have flowing garb next to whirling machinery and all that stuff.
Yeah.
The law isn't crazy, though sometimes it seems like it. And so that it takes that into account. But this was to get across that threshold, if you like. And I'm really proud, Kent, because the Seventh-day Adventist Church, my colleagues at the headquarters there, did what's called an amicus brief, that's a friend of the court brief, in support of this Muslim woman because of the principles that were at stake. And I'm proud that they did, and I'm proud that they won the case 8-1.
Wow, okay. I mean, this issue goes broader. I mean, in France, for example, there's been some pretty hardcore bans on the Muslim headscarf. I think Turkey, too, surprisingly, has some pretty strict rules.
Traditionally, yes.
Yeah. Why would a Christian church speak out about an issue to do with Islam? Can you just, as we explain it?
I mean, religious freedom is a principle that goes across the board, and if you start saying religious freedom applies to me and not to somebody else, well, that's not really religious freedom. That's just individual privilege.
Sure.
And Christianity at our core says, you know, what I want for myself, I should accord to somebody else.
Do unto others as you would have them to do to you.
You may have heard that one before.
Yeah, here and there, yeah.
It's in the greatest hits. The point is, the headscarf issue is complex. If a woman is coerced to wear a headscarf, that's wrong, and we would support her individual right not to. And of course, when a headscarf turns into a complete covering so that somebody is completely obscured and almost becomes anonymous.
That becomes a security issue.
Well, not a security issue, but an issue of individual rights. And so there is, with every right, you look at the margins and you say, well, there's some serious issues here. But somebody wearing a headscarf as a general proposition when they're not coerced and that's what they want to do and that's what they feel is their religious duty, well, that person shouldn't be discriminated against because of that, and we will support her right every time.
I mean, nuns do it all the time, and we've never had any problem with that. Thanks so much.
Not since The Sound of Music. So.
No. Thanks so much for your time, James. Really appreciate it.
It's a pleasure.
We'll take a short break now. Family in Focus is back in just a sec.
Signs of the Times, a magazine for a world on the brink. And this month in Signs, how one courageous woman stood up to ISIS and won. The only hope for repairing humanity's defective gene pool. A little veggie patch can benefit both your own health and the environment. Getting to know the different faces of God. All in this month's Signs of the Times. Subscribe to Signs today and change your life.
To smack or not to smack? That is the question today. We're here with our family life educator, Trafford Fisher. Trafford, the Bible does tell us a couple of times in Proverbs, spare the rod, spoil the child. What does that actually mean?
Yeah, that's a text that I think's been misunderstood a lot.
Okay.
The rod, what sort of rod was it? Generally, the rod in the Old Testament times was a shepherd's rod. It had a crook on it. Oh. And it wasn't for this, it was for this.
Oh.
It wasn't used to belt the sheep, it was to pull them out of danger and to guide them along the path.
Okay.
Right? So the word discipline, the real meaning of discipline is actually disciple, which means to teach.
Oh, that's beautiful.
So, yes, so the whole idea of discipling is to teach our kids. But we get this idea, we equate discipline with punishment.
That's right.
And that's where we miss.
Okay.
Right? So smacking is often used, it's a punishment. And it's convenient, right? It's right there, boof.
Cheap, it's easy, it's
and
always
it
there.
looks good in the shopping centre, right? All the people look, oh, isn't that terrible behaviour? Oh, mummy's doing something about it, boof.
Which is exactly what they would have done themselves.
Yeah, most probably it's true. But is it the best? Well, the tricky thing is alternatives take time. Right? So to sit down and have a chat with your child when he's kicking and having a big fuss, yeah, it's tricky. But there's pretty good, and I think growing evidence in the research to say that smacking really doesn't work.
Is the smacking actually a physical abuse? Is there a line in between? Do we need to be careful of crossing?
Yeah, that's the dilemma. Where's the crossing point? Right? So for some people, I can tap my child below the shoulders, open hand, that's going to be okay. Well, some people, that's okay. For others, no. Any form of inappropriate, force of any kind, any level, is wrong. So who's going to decide?
Yeah.
And if the legal bodies decide, well, so be it. But there's still going to be always that diversity of opinion.
So what are some better ways to guide and disciple our children?
The research on strong and healthy parenting, Monica, is that we learn to label the emotions. We teach the child to label the emotions. I am angry, I'm frustrated, I'm upset.
Okay.
It's an educational process. We take the child on a journey and label the emotions so that when they get angry, they know what's going on. And they recognise that what they're doing now is they're expressing their emotions somewhat inappropriately. I need to change that, but the emotion is okay.
Okay.
It's okay to be angry, it's okay to be upset. I've got to learn some new ways of expressing that and dealing with that. Now, it's a bit of a journey, but it is a journey we can take.
And a rewarding one at the end,
And
I
a
guess.
very rewarding. We've got to stay connected with our child as much as we can, because when we smack, we take the control away from them and we own responsibility for it. And we've got to get them into the journey of becoming responsible for their behaviour as they grow.
Thanks so much for that, Trafford.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching, and we'll be right back after the break.
Discover some of these artists from Salter Music. Anna Weatherup.
Oh, people get ready for the train to Jordan.
Castles in Air.
Like watchmen wait for the morning light.
Eric and Monique.
You alone are my strength, my refuge.
Sapphire.
His love reached the bottom of the ocean.
No matter what shade of musical taste you have, you might just find something that sings to you. It's all waiting to be discovered at saltermusic.com. Fresh and exciting original Christian music from Salter Music.
Hi, welcome back. Well, if there's one part of the Bible that has caused more confusion and consternation and speculation than any other, it would have to be the final book of the Bible, the book of Revelation. But fortunately, here with us today we have Dr. Cale Duval, who's a New Testament scholar and has just written this great book on Revelation, Ancient Words, Present Hope. So, Cale, why Revelation? What's so special about Revelation? Why should a Christian read it? Because it's been seen as a closed book for a long time, hasn't it?
That's very true, Kent. Look, I'm delighted to be here. In fact, the opening sentence, the revelation of Jesus Christ, tells us that revelation in the original Greek is actually a disclosure or an unveiling. So the book, while rich in symbolism and metaphor, is honestly a revelation, a disclosure and an unveiling of Jesus Christ. And the challenge for the ordinary reader is to work through the symbols and the metaphors and the complexity of language to discover Jesus. But certainly, Kent, Jesus is at the heart and center of the book of Revelation.
Wow, okay. Now, I notice you've subtitled this book, What the Old Testament Teaches Us About Revelation. But if I'm not wrong, Revelation doesn't have one single direct quote from the Old Testament in its whole, 22 chapters. So how did you manage to write a whole book on something that's, some people would say, is not even there?
That's a very good question, Kent. In fact, of the 404 verses in the book of Revelation, 278 of those verses have allusions or perhaps even echoes to the Old Testament.
Okay, so not direct quotes.
That's correct.
But allusions.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So there's a rich density of Old Testament ideas, symbols, persons, events within the book of Revelation. We need to remember that for John, his Bible was the Old Testament.
Sure.
And guided by the Spirit of God, having spent time with Jesus in person in his ministry, and looking at Jesus in terms of the way in which he modeled and taught and exemplified the Old Testament scriptures, no doubt that had a major impact on John and his understanding. And so when he received his visions of Jesus on Patmos, the language he used is the language of his own past, the language of his own scriptures. And so he found a rich, beautiful resource in the Old Testament scriptures to convey the beauty of what he had found now in Jesus Christ.
Okay. And so I guess it's really important to understand Revelation written in its own historical context to its own first audience. And that was the 7 churches of Asia Minor, which is now Turkey. Is that right?
That's correct, yes.
What did Revelation mean to them, do you think?
Meaning must begin for us in that first century context. It made sense to those early Christians in the 7 churches of Asia Minor. And there again, their scriptures were the Old Testament. So while we might struggle to understand some of the allusion and echo, for those early Christians, they understood it immediately when they heard the symbols and the allusions pointing to those Old Testament scriptures. In that first century context, the dominant socio-political power of the world back then was the Roman Empire.
Of course, right, yeah.
And so there's no question that for that first century audience, the powers of Revelation 13, the religious and political forces in Revelation 13, would have pointed them to the Roman Empire.
And John, of course, is imprisoned by the Roman Empire on Patmos, so Rome would have been looming very large in his experience.
Most definitely, most definitely. But beyond that, the book of Revelation states quite clearly that John was in the Spirit when he received these visions. So it's a rich, charismatic text. And so the Spirit of God has inspired John. So not only do we work at the level of what is John desiring to communicate to the early Christians in first century Asia Minor, but what is the Spirit of God saying through John to us, even as contemporary readers? And it's at that point, Kent, that we realize that the symbols, the metaphors, don't just point to what's happening in that first century context, but because it's an inspired text coming to us from God, it has meaning for us even in our present context as well.
Okay. Now, I was at your recent book launch where you launched this book, Ancient Words, Present Hope. And one of the theologians who was there sort of commenting on your book, she said, I was always interested in mathematics as a child, and so I really enjoyed Revelation because it involved puzzles and symbols and things that needed to be decoded. But you've actually said, in some ways, Revelation is not so much a puzzle than a poem. What do you mean by that? And what are maybe the dangers of reading it as a puzzle rather than a poem?
Yeah. Kent, we've got to be so careful when we study the symbols in Revelation. When we study Scripture, the simple approach is we've always got to take it from a literal standpoint. With Revelation, the basic standpoint is we've always got to interpret from a symbolic standpoint. So it's a very different approach to all the other books within the New Testament and indeed the Old Testament as well. I think we've got to be cautious not to look for a one-to-one correspondence between a symbol and something in our contemporary society, Russia or China or America. I think we do the book a great disservice when we attempt to look at the symbols and make a correspondence or an application to our present context without first looking at the book and its message in its historical context, number one, number two, in its Old Testament context, and then within the larger context of Scripture itself in terms of what is God saying to us as human beings, and then have a look at how does this apply to our present day context.
In saying that, though, Kyle, are you departing, because you're the head of the Adventist seminary here in Australia, the Avondale Seminary, and the traditional Adventist understanding, as far as I understand it, is that some of these powers and beasts mentioned in Revelation have very specific one-to-one correspondence. You know, the beast that comes out of the sea is the apostate church. The beast that comes out of the land is the United States of America. I mean, we've been that specific about it. Are you departing from that orthodoxy in suggesting that?
By no means. By no means. What I mean by this, Kent, is that we need to look at, firstly, the applicability of the symbol in its first century context.
Sure.
And say that meaning making begins there, and the text is speaking to that audience. But beyond that, the text is also speaking to us. Our pioneers were brave and indeed courageous in identifying the land beast of Revelation 13:11 as the United States, because at
their
that
own
stage,
country, yeah.
Exactly. But beyond that, at that stage, the United States was not a dominant world player. And so for them to make that interpretation in the 1800s already was, as I say, was brave and courageous. And I believe as we look at the landscape of politics and society today, we clearly see that the dominant force being the United States around the world. What I've tried to do, Kent, is to move away from sensationalism, to move away from headlines, to move away from trying to constantly apply the text to our present day. I think we rob the book of its richness by discounting its rich spiritual and theological and practical application to our own hearts and our own lives. So I'm an Orthodox Adventist Christian as far as that goes, but I think we need to look at the book in its richness, and in rather pointing to beasts and political powers and forces that might come into the world scene down the track, the book really encourages the reader to focus on Jesus Christ and to focus on how the message of the book impacts their own personal walk with Jesus.
Wow. Hey, thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate it, Cale. If you'd like to get hold of Ancient Words Present Hope, you can do that. It's on Amazon. You can get a Kindle version as well, I understand.
That's correct.
That's right. You can also check out the Adventist book centres in Australia and New Zealand, and perhaps going to other Christian bookstores pretty soon. Thanks so much for your time, Cale. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Kent.
We'll be back straight after the break.
Planning your future can be a daunting task. What you want to do, who you want to be, and the road ahead can often be unpredictable. No one really knows what the future holds. That's just part of what makes it all so amazing. And that's why a great education matters. Because it doesn't just help you get a great job, it helps you prepare for what life can throw at you and live a great life. Avondale. It's education designed for life.
Hello, well, we really hope that you've learnt something today, been challenged or even inspired by something you saw or heard.
Oh, absolutely. Did you agree? Did you disagree? Can you tell us something more about the topic? If you want to tell us about it, we'd love to receive an email from you or a note via Facebook or Twitter.
Yes, please. Thank you so much for your support and interest this week. We'll see you next time on Record in Focus.
God bless.